A South Australian bakery is leading a revival of ancient grains in a mission to add more flavour to modern bread. The sourdough specialists are growing wheat varieties which haven't been seen by most commercial farmers for more than 100 years. And as Kerry State reports, they're hoping the heritage seeds will create a new niche agricultural industry.
Langhorne Creek, southeast of Adelaide, is known for its red wine. But in the middle of one vineyard is a rather peculiar patch. A living library of old grains planted by local bakers.
We were interested to see whether there was something that could perform really well in our fields, but we could bring it into the bakery and see what kind of wildness can there be in those flavours.
Emily Solkeld and Chris Duffy have tasted a lot of what agriculture has to offer. She's a former cheesemaker. He's a qualified viticulturalist. And their parents have also been involved in primary industries, including livestock and cropping. But this trial plot in their 30-hectare vineyard is new territory. It's part of a plan to make their bread taste better and along the way educate their children.
The kids live in a region where production is geared towards the commodity market, and they can see to a certain extent that a lot of the control of that end product that they are involved in growing is taken out of their hands. And if they look at what we're trying to do, they can see almost something that's a closed loop.
Emily opened the bakery a decade ago, with sourdough the speciality. She decided to grow some of her own ingredients after tasting flour and bread made from a couple of older grains that were hard to find but packed a punch.
To be honest, I'd never thought that wheat could have an identity. I think that was something that was a bit of a bombshell for me.
A tour of artisan bakeries in Europe and the United States opened the family's eyes even further to the diverse flavours of vintage and wilder wheats.
I sometimes think about culinary terms to describe the bread. We think of spices and nuts and grass and hay.
Some fruit characteristics sometimes.
Yeah. And it's not only the fermentation characteristics, it's really from the wheat.
The Global Taste Test provided a lot of inspiration and contacts in a cottage industry where information is light on. Indeed, when it came to selecting what seeds to sow, the couple often had nothing more to go on than a few references in old agricultural journals.
We would just pick up on something like great milling ability, or fantastic in bread production, or fair milling, and it really didn't mean very much, but it was something, and so we thought, well, we'll just go with that.
This is our big freezer where we keep the cereal collection.
Ooh, -20. Cosy. The bakery sourced its heritage lines from the Australian Grains Gene Bank at Horsham in Victoria, a collection of 140,000 different types of seeds.
So this is our wheat section. The first 7 bays are of wheat, then we start on our barley and oat collections.
It supplied about 80 possible starters, including ancient grains like einkorn and emmer, which are basically the parents of modern wheat.
This is some of the old heritage wheats from before World War II.
While the historic material isn't generally in high demand, Kevin Murray has recently been making a few more trips to this end of the aisle.
Well, there have been a few requests over the last few years from a couple of bakeries and a couple of farmers as well that wanted to get back into the old varieties.
Small World Bakery is certainly living up to its name, selecting a diverse mix of grains for its trial plot from the Middle East, Europe and North America, including this Canadian wheat called Marquis.
So over here we've got something that we've been interested in exploring, which is growing red wheats in Australia.
That's something that I would imagine most people haven't heard of.
Not really. In Australia, we historically favoured white wheats. It was the perception that white wheat produced whiter flour.
So why are you interested in the red wheat?
Well, we found if we do want to produce white flour, it doesn't matter whether it's red or white wheat. If you remove the bran, you don't get the colour. But if you do keep the bran and the germ, you get more flavour, particularly with a red wheat.
Oh, okay. So it's also revisiting the iconic Australian variety, Federation wheat, which was released in 1901 and helped establish Australia as a significant grain producer.
The first seed breeder that really gained national acclaim was William Farrer, and he was the one that bred Federation wheat. He was a really innovative farmer who worked in the late 1800s to try to find wheats that would be more resilient to the Australian climate.
Flavour comes first, but as with any kind of commercial farming, the crops still have to be hardy enough to make it worthwhile. And one of the big question marks over these less resistant varieties is how will they cope with disease? A wetter than normal spring last year tested them out, with stem rust setting in.
It's very easy to understand why they're scarce, and while not everyone is necessarily going down that route, they're difficult to grow. They're certainly not as robust in many aspects compared to more modern wheat varieties.
While yields were affected, the couple was satisfied with the quality of what they collected at harvest.
Much more than half of some of those parcels of wheat that had been affected by fungal diseases had some lovely fat, healthy grains with a glassy appearance, which indicates a really nice hard protein level that will produce good flour and strong dough.
The older pre-dwarfing varieties are also taller and more susceptible to blowing over and lodging. While that didn't happen last season, some unexpected trespassers had a similar impact.
We accommodated a family of kangaroos pretty well.
The kangaroos lounged around a lot in one of the varieties, and we couldn't work out why that was, but yeah, they flattened a couple.
For those that last the distance, harvest throws up its own hurdles.
Everybody who's trying to revive old varieties have to really rise to the challenge of finding small-scale machinery. Everybody comes up with some pretty cool innovations. We had to make our own mechanical scythe when we were harvesting, and that involved attaching a hedge trimmer to a pole saw and then a wheel onto the end of the hedge trimmer so that that could be wheeled along through the wheat.
The family isn't just growing its own grains, it plans to grind them too, after importing a stone mill from the United States. But that isn't straightforward either. Some ancient grains, like emmer and einkorn, have a double hull that has to be removed first.
They're probably the most interesting, what we've seen from a flavour perspective, but at the same time they're the most difficult to process. But at the end of all that, you can have something that's pretty special. Here's the rye flour.
Oh, great.
The bakers don't yet have enough of the experimental grains to add a bit of heritage to their commercial loaves. When they do, the plan is to use the whole grain, including the flavour-filled wheat germ oil that's often removed because it can go rancid and reduce the shelf life of flour.
What we are doing is using it as fresh as possible, and those flavours that we get from the bran and the minerals and the vitamins that are present in the bran and the germ, we're getting the flavour that is carried by all three fractions of the grain.
To produce enough seeds so they can start experimenting in the bakery, the family is now scaling up, sowing a patch that's 15 times larger than the trial plot they planted last year.
So where are we going now, Chris?
We'll just go down in that first bay with this lot.
By broadacre farming standards, this is a small cedar. But it's a big deal for the bakers, who started with just 100 seeds of each variety and now have enough to require a tractor-pulled unit. Today, it's planting a North American grain called Sonora, which dates back to the 1700s.
It was a wheat that's soft and white and used for tortillas. Now, we don't have a tortilla culture in Australia as such, but it's been proven to be really successful in the bakery with pastry flour, and also blended in with some of the flour to use for bread, and it has a really lovely flavour.
Sonora is one of 15 grains to make it this far through the process. Not all of them will make the final cut, although the shortlist may get longer first.
We keep finding out about more interesting ones that perhaps we might request. Yeah, it's pretty hard to stop, actually.
I was going to say, is it a little bit addictive?
It's pretty addictive, yeah. But yeah, to be practical, we do need to narrow them down.
More rain, the better. It might germinate.
Heavy machinery isn't required for all of the sowing program. While the couple hopes to be harvesting enough of the older varieties to start using them in their commercial bread by 2020, some, like the ancient grain Khorasan, have a little further to go than others, with only manpower needed to drive this seeder.
This one is used by market gardeners. It's something that is not so much hard work as crawling along on your hands and knees and placing seed in the furrow as we did in the first year.
As the couple step up production, they're encouraging other farmers to get involved.
I think there's room for all scales and all sizes of agricultural production systems, and that this might be one way that on a smaller scale and within a local community that you can get viable crop alternatives for people with on less land or perhaps higher value land.
Sowing alongside the pair with a more familiar seeder is one local farmer who is already on board. James Stacey has leased part of his 220 hectare property to Emily and Chris to help them expand.
I could use this paddock to grow wheat to try and compete with the Russians and the Ukrainians, but I can make more money out of it leasing it to these guys to grow their old varieties to sell into a premium market.
The mixed farmer has already diversified into growing lucerne for seed production. He sees the heritage grains as another niche market worth investing in. And he's investigating it further after winning a Nuffield Scholarship, an award that gives primary producers a chance to study an agricultural topic of their choice overseas.
My topic is challenges and opportunities for agriculture in the peri-urban area and how we can generate more dollars back to our farm and also link more closely with consumers. And I think this is a perfect example of what can be done and what I'll be doing in the future.
As for the bakers leading the renaissance of old world wheat, reviving the past is unlikely to turn into a massive profit anytime soon. But they say there's enough interest to give the seeds a second chance. And if nothing else, it makes farming and baking much more exciting.
If you ask me right now, would I do this if it was simply about making money? The answer is no. If you want to make money in baking, you make donuts filled with Nutella. That's what makes money, but that's not really what we're about. So, look, I've seen it work in other businesses. There's no doubt that we're supporting it right now. But no, I think I'm confident enough there's a future. Yeah.